Hi there, welcome to the archives. So I thought I'd do a video for I Ego You because I only have the audio versions, I don't have video versions. So today is October the 7th, and this is the 2-year anniversary of my blogs. I Ego You was the first blog that I posted on my website. And so I just posted about it on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I'll just read the blurb and then I'll read the actual article, not an article, the actual blog. Okay? So this is the caption that I had. 2 years ago today, I posted my first blog on my website. It was called I Ego You and was a reflection of the idea that I was a covert narcissist or that I had covert narcissistic tendencies. I was mostly reflecting on my actions, thought patterns, and behaviors that I noted in myself during my PhD research project. The more shame I was in, the more I found the narcissistic tendencies showed up. The more insecure I became, the more grandiose I performed. My sense of self-importance was intense. I was preoccupied with fantasies of power and success. I believed that I was special and unique. I felt entitled to being catered to because do you know who I am? I had a need for excessive admiration, looking outside of myself to everyone but me for validation. I was envious of others, bitter and unable to celebrate them wholeheartedly. I was no doubt arrogant. I just listed all 9 of the attributes that are required for clinical diagnosis, and that's assuming that it affects your ability to live and work. And there's a whole other lot of other requirements as well too. I invite you to check out the DSM for what's required for clinical narcissism. But I think that if I kept it real, I'd probably get a diagnosis if I was honest, and that if a lot more of us were honest, and if we saw ourselves as we are for who we are, rather than um, who we think we are. And that's something I wrote about. Anyways, I'm going to read the I Ego You actually later. But if we were kept it real, I think a lot more of us would have higher rates. And as always, I make a distinction between medical narcissism. I'm not talking about entirely about those who have clinical diagnosis. Um, as I say in the blog, I've never been diagnosed with NPD, and according to the APA, the prevalence rates for NPD range from 0% to 6.2% of those samples. So it's actually quite low. It's even though it's like this like hot topic catchphrase right now. There's most people cannot actually said to be narcissists proper. So the APA is very clear about any personality disorder needing to deviate markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. And herein lies my cultural critique of NPD. If any of these 5 traits or more are required for a clinical diagnosis, but in North America it is culturally acceptable to to exhibit all 9 of these traits, can any one of us be said to deviate markedly from the expectations of the culture? So if somebody is clinically diagnosed with NPD, how their actions, their behaviors, the reasons why that they were diagnosed, is that deviating markedly from the culture? I don't think it's deviating from the culture at all. I think if anything is very in line with the culture. The culture is very narcissistic. White supremacy, it's very narcissistic. It's all about power and domination. Shame, which is what I study, is all about control dynamics and power. These are things that we struggle with. We all have some sort of narcissistic tendencies. Um, and again, that is very ableist as well too, especially for those who are actually clinically diagnosed with NPD. And I definitely understand that as well. But from a political and social um, definition of narcissism, which is what I go by, and even the cultural, I think then we have to parse out a lot of things. The culture is narcissistic. I got caught up in the systems. If you read that, how awful I was, that was me getting caught up in the system. If we have people are going on right now about um, yay, that is these are the conversations that, but like what it looks like in real time is that we're acting awful. And that might be because we have certain things, but at the same time, it's awful. Period. Meaning the white supremacy, the power, the domination, the misogynistic behavior. It's awful. And I don't think, and a lot of people are saying that that's actually not the mental illness. That's just your character. What song is it that says the character dirty? Okay. I have my issues with Western psychology. So again, I don't really place it at my center. I just was writing yesterday about thinking through ideas of madness and those who speak to themselves being seen as mad, those who are talking to something, an entity, a spirit, a ghost. Maybe they think that they're in a different world, a different reality. These ideas to me are also very normal based on how just my own beliefs. Um, and I take issue with a lot of what the DSM it's in the like I anyways, that's neither here nor there. Maybe I'll do another. The stuff I wrote yesterday, I might blog about it, but I prefer to use it for a chapter because I have work to do. So I have my issues with Western psychology. I don't really place it at my center. I do find value in it, but I also think that it's like, why is American psychology what the whole world models itself after? When there's a whole entire world of people that are different based on their different cultures. So I was talking to somebody recently, and they were saying that in their Filipino culture, looking at your elder in their eye is a sign of disrespect. And so they would get in trouble growing up because they would come home looking at their parent in their eye, and their parent is like, "Why are you disrespecting me by looking at me in the eye?" But then she's being taught at school that like when you talk to people, you look at them in the eye. And then we have psychiatry that then says that this is a clinical thing and it's a diagnosis. It's like you now have a you're being labeled with something. But because my culture says that it's normal, but your culture says, and now under your culture, I have a disease? Like, what? That don't make no sense. For those of us who came from cultures where it was animism was what was practiced, where you believe that plants have consciousness, where you believe that trees have consciousness, that everything is able to like, it would make sense if somebody's saying that they're talking to a plant. But because your culture doesn't believe that, and because your culture has that domination and runs the whole of culture, Americanization, McDonald'sization, now I'm using all of these words. Anyways, that's neither near here. To 8 minutes. This is just the introduction to the. All to say, I have a lot of issues with some of these different things, and I mostly just use the word because it makes people really angry. I'm just being a menace at the same time as well too. Because have you noticed how angry people get when you call them a narcissist, or you even insinuate that they're a narcissist? It's like when you call somebody a racist that is actually a racist. Which is why if you ever tell me that you're not a narcissist and I see you online critiquing narcissism, in my head you automatically are a narcissist, even though I don't really up with the word either. And I think it's all just a bunch of, but then it's not, because then it's psychology is real and people, because then it becomes Satanism. And people get really mad and they don't understand that line. Um, anyways, so this is the article. What it's basically about, I think that it was just me being, I need to check myself. And based on the work that I was doing on shame, and I was doing ethnography, so studying cultures, which meant that the word came up. Narcissism was a theme in my research. So if you're doing coding and you're analyzing the research, that is also why I use it, because that's what people were talking about in the communities that I was watching, observing, and studying. So now I'll go in and actually read it. So it's called I Ego You. I was meandering on YouTube, as one tends to do, and stumbled across an older episode of Beyond the Fix My Life, hosted by Black American writer and lawyer and New Thought spiritual leader Iyanla Vanzant. In this particular segment, Ms. Vanzant was counseling a mother-daughter duo. The younger lady appeared distraught. I shouldn't have called them a lady. That's something I need to fix. And I don't even, I just, I mean, she identified as she, but just that's another thing. It's just like where transphobia can show up because I'm just assuming that people are women or even ladies. And if you are a transphobe, then like you probably don't understand why that would be problematic. And I didn't at one point either. Okay, just stick to the script. She appeared distraught, as most participants on the show tend to do. The daughter was hurt. She expressed grief and resentment towards her mother, who she claimed had slapped her on numerous occasions as a child, something her other siblings were never subjected to. As she lamented over her personal history, Iyanla sat in as a mediator, offering support and advice for both parties. The young woman's story was familiar, but the differences in kind were jarring, what I perceived to be an excessive amount of pain being expressed. What a waste of resources. All of this commotion over a slap. Is she doing this for attention? And if so, how entitled and spoiled? Hadn't we all grown up in physically abusive households? Haven't we all experienced much worse? What made her so special? I was completely beside myself. If she had been physically beaten with stainless steel appliances, wooden utensils, leather belts, raggedy coat hangers, or any other inanimate object in reach during a beating, then she could lay claim to real betrayal. These were the stories of physical abuse that I was used to. I, like so many, had grown up knowing the difference between a spanking and a beating, between discipline and punishment. It was clear she hadn't. I was confused by how, as an adult, she had yet to overcome childhood slapping. How weak, I remember thinking. Simply put, I was affected and offensive. My visceral reaction startled me. I could not contain what was rushing to me. It was as if her anger and rage had lunged at me through the laptop, bitterness wrapped tightly with envy which flooded the room. So many of us had been told to get over abuse, yet here she was, this daughter of a slapping mother, getting attention so freely given, and with the added opportunity to make sense of her black femme body as a victim. And over a slap, I could not imagine. The opportunity to sit down and discuss such matters with a trained professional came off as privilege. My only framework was one of being met with silence and dismissal. Disdain and contempt were all I knew, and therefore all I had to offer her. In retrospect, my reaction was insensitive and immature. It was violent and even ableist and sanist. Rather than interrogating my own feelings, I attacked her character. I used my own traumatic experiences as an excuse to justify my lack of empathy. My internal wounds were bubbling over, so I did to her what I had learned to do to myself, what others had done to me. I dismissed, I negated, I ridiculed, and I name called. I took the segment personally and made it about me, when in actuality it had nothing to do with me at all. An example of how I cannot show up for others because I simply do not know how. Or if I do, I unconsciously or subconsciously still struggle to. This is not the first time. Let me share a story, as storytellers tend to do. Corny! I was catching up on Abbott Elementary. I don't give a fuck if I'm corny. So there's that. Okay, that's not written. This is off script. This is on script. I am highly sensitive and live with sciatica, or at least I was told, depression and anxiety. In 2013, my body began to call my attention like never before. It did this through painful feeling sensations. Everything got on my nerves, pun intended. My nervous system was overactive, a state of entropy that I felt unbearable. I was hypersensitive to everything, including the subtlest energetic shifts in my environment. Negative emotions stuck to and accumulated on and near me and often, an intensity I had no language for, let alone able to make sense of. I felt traumas bending and reaching toward me from across other times, mainly the past, but sometimes from the future. My physical body began to hurt. The internal division ran vertical, the separation from head to toe. All the pain ran down my left side. The attack was as Beyonce sings, to the left, to the left. And when I performed that, people were like, oh, there's no life. You should have, to the left, to the, it's not supposed to be happy. This is not supposed to be a happy thing. To the left, to the left. I had reoccurring pain in my left knee due to a partial tear to my ACL during my more limber days as a varsity in club rugby. My pelvis would clench tight and often. With it came a burning in my shoulder and low back, what felt like the bluest part of a candle. Pain cascaded down my leg like a waterfall. The tension continued into my left ankle and foot, where my first tattoo reads priceless. It did not stop there. It ventured further down toward my toes as if approaching its finale, a confusing climax that left my pinky toe feeling sticky, making yeah, my already flat-footed feet feel webbed like a duck. I was coming undone at a time when social movements were rising. As women and girls and brown and black lives protested, so too did my left side. Collective defiance echoed loudly in my body, the contagion palpable. In some spiritual communities, it is said that the left side of the body is feminine and the right masculine. This is similar to the Taoist concept of yin, which is feminine, and yang, which is masculine, in Eastern traditions. How this naturalized gendering of energy came to be is still unclear to me. Someone was telling me recently too that in some culture communities they look at the left side as the sun and the right side as the moon, which again is also still very gendered, but it's a different way of reading it. Um, so risking Cartesian dualism, I decided, and I got sucked into the seductive trappings of cultural appropriation that laces New Age spirituality. Risking Cartesian dualism, I decided to explore the idea of my body housing both feminine and masculine energies. If all of my psychosomatic symptoms were located on the left side, what did it mean to have pain expressed only through the feminine? And the unresponsive and uninvolved right side, what did this tell me about the masculine within me? I was a feminist being called to contend with everyday sexism and misogyny absorbed within. I was caught up in identifying how my body, this house, my home, had compartmentalized pain in similar ways that ran parallel to the world. I invite you to also look at Eve Ensler's TED Talk on this topic. How had I internalized a patriarchal imprint as toxic and problematic as patriarchy itself? Arrogant and self absorbed, mean spirited and bullish at times, my multiplicities meant I was messy. How I was living was sometimes awful. I was unpleasant to be around while claiming to be positive and on a spiritual path. I could never find fault in my own wrongdoing. Internalized oppressions of all kinds meant that I, at times, was anti black and anti brown, anti indigenous and anti African, even though I am a black African Ghanaian woman. Strict religious upbringings meant that I had bought into homo, bi, queer, and transphobic programming, even as a queer woman. Deep seated messaging about fat and disabled people, Jewish and Muslim folks, as well as mad and neurodivergent people, jumped out in the grossest of ways. How I hated myself showed up in my inability to meet others where they were. I was jealous of others, I gossiped incessantly. Seeing other women flourish somehow caused me pain and reminded me of my own failures. I was struggling to be accountable with those I had hurt. I was sometimes too prideful to apologize. Trying to smash patriarchy outside of me was difficult because I could always decode a level of hypocrisy in my own well intentioned pursuit. I was doing that thing I do where I appear narcissistic in psychologically and emotionally abusive ways that have resulted in conflict and separation in the past. In the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders 5, which was published in 2013, the American Psychiatric Association, also known as the APA, they define narcissistic personality disorder as, and this is a quote, a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, a lack of empathy that begins by early adulthood and is present in a variety of contexts. In order to be diagnosed with clinical NPD, the APA requires that individuals meet 5 or more of these 9 criteria. 1 is a grandiose sense of self-importance. 2 is preoccupation with fantasies of power and success. 3 is that one believes that they are special and unique and should therefore be catered to as such. 4 was a need for excessive admiration. 5 was unreasonable entitlement. 6 was tendency to exploit and take advantage of others. 7 was a lack of empathy. 8 was a tendency to be envious, and 9 is arrogance. Of course, it needs to be noted that additional care conditions are required in order to diagnose clinical NPD. Contrary to popular belief, the majority of people who we call narcissists are actually not narcissistically clinically. According to the APA, the prevalence rates for NPD range from 0% to 6.2% of those samples. The APA is very clear that any personality disorder needing to deviate markedly from the expectations of the individual's culture. I already shared this part. And so what I said is while these conditions may be quote unquote abnormal under a different set of cultural circumstances in different environments, they're actually really normal given our North American cultural context. Narcissists are literally a thing right now in our culture. The term appears everywhere I turn in popular media, social media, self help communities, in psychological and spiritual communities, such as those in twin flame communities, all of which I studied and paid close attention to for research and personal purposes. Narcissism has become such a catchphrase that we sometimes forget that NPD is an actual medical condition that some in our populations live with. We often equate bad behavior associated with it with mental illness when the pair are mutually exclusive. So bad behavior is not mental illness. And we have that going around right now, especially again with the whole Kanye thing, right? That like his actions is not because of his mental illness, it's because he is choosing to be him and how he is. So, conflating the two can result in discrimination, stigmatization, and sadism against the disorder, as well as for those living with it, right? So, how we frame this as a mental illness then ends up impacting those who actually live with these conditions in real life, because then they face a lot of stigma and discrimination. So, for this reason, it's important to contextualize narcissism by framing it as social, cultural, and political. So, you can look at others who've talked about like the political depression, like Anne Veskovich does, and they contextualize depression as sociocultural and political. If I was narcissistic in my tendencies, I wasn't alone. Any entitlement, arrogance, egotistical preoccupations with power and success, any lack of empathy was rooted in envy and pettiness. All of these traits did not make me an anomaly. Unfortunately, on my worst days, I was in good company, which is why I find approaching narcissism through the sociocultural lens more useful. According to bell hooks, narcissism is neither purely medical nor located solely in the individual mind body. In All About Love, Hooks shares that a culture of narcissism is obsessed with power and domination that threaten love. Instead, we vie for a sense of personal safety, resulting in weaponization of love, which builds into power struggles and control dynamics. Cultures of narcissism confuse care and abuse as synonymous with love. Bell Hooks even suggests that cultures of narcissism fear triumphs, lying is rewarded, and deception is a socially acceptable norm. It is perfectly normal, even preferable and profitable, to exploit, undermine, and manipulate others. Bell Hooks writes, competition rooted in dehumanizing practices of shaming, of sadomasochistic rituals of power, preclude communalism and stand in the way of community. What we find instead is individualism, lovelessness, a lack of trust for one another, power imbalance run amok, empathy is viewed as naivete and weakness, emotional distancing and emotional unavailability is common. In cultures of narcissism, rather than I love you, what we sometimes mean is I ego you. I've never been diagnosed with clinical NPD. I've also never met a single person with it, or they haven't identified to me, or probably because they know that I'm not safe to because of how they hear me talking about it. Yet I'm surrounded by those who espouse these tendencies, myself included. The difference is that my empathic and self reflective nature necessitates that I take the possibility of NPD very seriously. True narcissists will never do that. Admit it, they will not. And so, if we place bell hooks' definition of culture of narcissism along the DSM definition, the two overlap, right? That I lambasted another Black woman for authentically sharing violence pertaining to her lived experience was completely in line with our culture of narcissism. I completely rationalized my violence as normal. This could be why it felt like war was being waged on my body. I was overexerting toxic masculinities while still trying to, while still carrying excess emotional baggage, and to the point of disability. Hold on, I have to charge my phone. My laptop. Okay. Where was I? I was an undiagnosed narcissist, overburdened with over-empathizing. These contradictory experiences occupied the same mind-body. I needed to heal and to tend to any internal wounds that got in the way of me showing up for others. This website, which will feature more of my healing journey as well as how it connects with my PhD work on shame research. I will document raw and painful accounts of how I came to face all of my many selves and what this meant for my interpersonal relationships with others. Spoiler alert, no one likes a problematic narcissist, especially if you're a Black woman, because you end up where I am. And if you know the past couple of weeks that I had, this is what we do. We don't like a problematic Black woman. A problematic Black man, though, oh, they eat it up. Look at Kanye. They eat it up. I needed to heal, and solidarity had to be done differently, starting with accountability. This blog post allows me to finally issue a public apology to the various communities I hurt in the process of my coming undone, including many of my own. I needed to extend my sincerest apologies to any and all individuals that I offended. I regret so many transgressions that cannot be taken back. It took well over 4 years of working out my own issues offline to finally begin accepting the grave realities of the damage and harm that I caused others. And even more recently, feeling into my body, feeling it even more, just like how awful all of it was. Right? So this was 2 years ago, I recognized it. But now 2 years later, I'm seeing it even more. I think it was Erica Hart who posted recently how what people call healing is them actually coming into accountability or running from accountability. And I completely agree with that. That's actually a very valid definition of healing, is you start realizing like how you fucked up. You're seeing all of what you are. And then that means you're being more accountable to yourself. You're setting different boundaries. You're treating people a lot differently. It took canceling myself to assess my thoughts, actions, and behavior. Getting canceled by others made me realize that the many fractured relationships along were mostly my own fault. It still shames me to admit that my mind body reads as a manifestation of the attack on the feminine, on women, on feminism, and feminists. That these dynamics that I oppose reside in me, it was horrifying. What this process has taught me is that knowing is not enough. Dr. Laurie Santos over at Yale University, she calls it the G.I. Joe effect. And basically it's like, while I am trained in anti-racist, it's this idea that it's not enough to know, right? You could know something, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to apply it. I was a trained anti-racist and anti-oppression facilitator and educator, and for well over a decade, I have degrees in global studies, sociology, equity studies. I'm currently I got just a PhD in feminist and gender studies, and still I could not escape the deep conditioning that threatens us all. White supremacy is no joke. It will destroy all of us, white people included. And I think this is like, I had to recognize that. Sometimes we're like, oh, well, they're feminists, so they know better. Or like, no. I was in a feminist department and how we were all off. It was awful. There are, of course, complex nuances that shape maladaptive and destructive cycles that are difficult to break, especially when we're not aware and introspective. Patriarchy is vile, and as bell hooks and others have asserted, it has no gender. From religious institutions, to school to prison pipeline, the medical industrial complex, unjust political structures, so much goes into shaping our problematic belief systems and our practices. Mental illness, trauma, chronic pain, these challenges should never, ever be an excuse for bad behavior. Though they do complicate it. It's not an excuse, but it definitely complicates it. When you're miserable every day because you're in chronic pain, and part of that misery is you going at other people and your jokes then and becoming are anti-black because our culture is deeply anti-black and everybody finds anti-blackness funny, especially if it's misogynoir and you're being anti-black towards a black woman and that sells and people loves it. Deprogramming, unlearning, and rewiring, what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, it has been painful. Accessing what black activist and Angela Davis calls the state in me. So really having to face the state in me, like where's the cop in me right now? Where am I doing the work of the state? That is not easy work. That is not easy work. I don't care what nobody tells you, that's not easy work. Having to be like, oh man, this is where my parallels are with my oppressor, because all of us are oppressed and oppressors at some point. That is not easy work. No one wants to do it. Everyone just wants to act like they're just so good and like they've never done a problematic thing in their fucking lives. And then when somebody does something, then they're all like, it's just like, shut up. All of us need to shut up. I'm so irritated with everything and everyone right now because it's not honest. We're all fucking awful. If we were all to have all of our behind the scenes put out there, we'd all get canceled for something. And that's not to excuse any of this, but and at the end of the day, is all to say we got sucked into a lot of the. I'll no. If you don't want to, I had to do this work. I had to face how fucking awful I was, and how hard it has been. And Frantz Fanon says that decolonization is going to be violent and it's going to hurt because colonization itself was. So I just never realized how much of this would play out on my mind body. I'm far from healed. I'm far from saved. I'm far from transformed. I've come a long way in the last 2 years especially, but I'm definitely still working on a lot of issues. So the healing and the integration, it has hurt too. And I sometimes still feel split in half, although my body, this house, my home, is always still whole. What is your emotional stuff getting in the way of you showing up for others? Do you identify with any of the 9 NPD traits? Does it make you so mad to even talk about NPD? Do you even know what the 9 traits are? Have you been grappling with your own messy nature? What tips and tools have you found helpful? Feel free to share if you so choose. If this resonates, please pass it along and share with others. If it doesn't, that's okay. That's fine. You don't have to. Probably won't, then who cares? Like, it is what it is, right? Like others, my words and me might not be meant for you, and that's perfect. You're probably not meant for me either. 2 years later, she's still the same. Anyways, thanks for stopping by. So until next time, in solidarity. So this is, again, the 2-year anniversary of I Ego You. So that was a blog. Okay, bye.